Daf Yomi, Tractate Bava, page 37b, the top of the page with the words shor, vashor, chamor, v'gamal mahu. Starting from before, the dilemma was raised from the sages. If an ox gored an ox, another ox, and a third ox, and then a donkey and a camel, with regard to what is it considered forewarned? The Gemara presents the possibilities. With regard to this with regard to this last ox that was gored, together with the donkey and the camel, if we place it together with the previously gored oxen, and accordingly the belligerent ox was still rendered forewarned only with regard to oxen, whereas with regard to other species it was not rendered forewarned. Or perhaps we placed this last ox together with the donkey and the camel, and it was rendered forewarned with regard to all the species it gored. The Gemara adds a similar dilemma. If an ox gored a donkey and a camel, and then an ox, and another ox, what is the halacha? The Gemara presents the possibilities. With regard to this first ox that it gored, do we place it together with the camel and the donkey, and the belligerent ox was accordingly rendered forewarned with regard to all species? Or perhaps we place it together with the two oxen that it gored afterward, and accordingly it was still rendered forewarned only with regard to oxen, whereas it was not rendered forewarned with regard to other species. Similarly, if it gored on Shabbat, on 3 consecutive Sabbaths, and then on Sunday and on Monday, what is the halacha? With regard to this last Shabbat, do we place it together with the previous Shabbat, and the ox was still rendered forewarned only with regard to Shabbat, whereas with regard to weekdays it was not rendered forewarned? Or perhaps we place it together with the goring on Sunday and Monday, and it was thereby rendered forewarned with regard to all days of the week. If an ox gored on Thursday and on Friday and Shabbat, and then the next Shabbat and the Shabbat after that, what is the halacha? With regard to the first Shabbat, do we place it together with the Thursday and Friday, and thereby hold that the ox was rendered forewarned with regard to all days of the week? Or perhaps we place the first Shabbat together with the 3 other Sabbaths, the 3 weeks consecutive, and the ox is rendered forewarned only with regard to Sabbath. The Gemara says, Teku, these dilemmas shall stand unresolved. And we won't know the answer, as the idea goes, until the coming of Messiah. However, it's an acronym, not however, I'm saying there's an acronym. Teku, Tishbi Ataris Kachis Yaboyas. And this is the 124th Teku in Talmud Bavali, per the book of Rabbi Aaron Yehoshua Pessin from Israel, from Ramat Beit Shemesh, I believe. He put together a book called Teku, which I'm studying, where he compiles all the Tekus in Shas, and so he lists them all. He enumerates each Teku. So this is the 124th out of all 317. If an ox gored on the 15th day of this month, and subsequently gored on the 16th day of the month after that, and then on the 17th of the month after that, the halacha is subject to dispute between Rav and Shmuel with regard to parallel discussion concerning a woman whose menstrual cycle begins on a different day each month. As it was stated, if a woman saw menstrual blood on the 15th day of this month, and on the 16th day of the month after that, and on the 17th day of the month after that, Rav says she has thereby established her menstrual cycle. Veset. In other words, a month and 1 day. Shmuel says her menstrual cycle is not established until she skips a day 3 times. According to Shmuel, the cycle is established in this case not by the date per se, but rather by the pattern of 1 additional day each month, only when this occurs for 3 consecutive months. When she menstruates in the 4th month is the pattern established. Rava said, if an ox heard the sound of a shofar and gored, and again heard the sound of a shofar and gored, and a 3rd time heard the sound of a shofar and gored, it is rendered forewarned with regard to the sound of shofars. The Gemara asks, isn't this obvious? Lest you say that this first shofar merely started the ox. Rava teaches us that since the ox repeatedly gored upon hearing the sound of a shofar, this sound is considered a consistent impetus for its goring. Mishnah, with regard to an ox of a Jew that gored a consecrated ox, and conversely, a consecrated ox that gored a non-sacred ox, the owner of the ox is exempt from paying compensation, as is stated, if one man's ox hurts the ox of another, Exodus 21:35, but not if it is a consecrated ox. With regard to the ox of a Jew that gored the ox of a Gentile, the owner of the belligerent ox is exempt from liability with regard to the ox of a Gentile that gored the ox of a Jew. If a Jew or a Gentile, the owner of the ox, of the belligerent ox. Okay, this is just the Talmud. I'm making a disclaimer. I'm not saying this. This is obviously not for today. But this is according to this thing. I'm making a distinction. Okay? With regard to an ox of a Gentile that gored a Jew, regardless of whether the goring ox is an ox, the owner pays the full cost of damage. That's very racist, it's prejudiced, and I don't agree with it. So let's continue. The Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, as it is taught in a Braita, with regard to a non-sacred ox that gored a consecrated ox, or a consecrated ox that gored a non-sacred ox. The owner of the ox is exempt from liability, as it is stated. The ox of another indicating, but not a consecrated ox. Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh says, with regard to a consecrated ox that gored a non-sacred ox, the temple treasury is exempt from liability with regard to a non-sacred ox that gored a consecrated ox, whether it was an ox or forewarned, the owner pays full cost of damage. The sages said, what does Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh hold? If the phrase of another is meant in a precise manner, then even with regard to a non-sacred ox that gored a consecrated ox, the owner of the belligerent ox should be exempt from liability, as the victim is not the ox of the other, but belongs to the temple treasury. And if the phrase of another is not meant in a precise manner, but rather includes all oxen, then a consecrated ox that gored a non-sacred ox should render the temple treasury liable as well. And if you would say that actually Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh holds that of another is meant in a precise manner, and accordingly if a consecrated ox gores a non-sacred ox, in the temple treasury is exempt from liability, but nevertheless when a non-sacred ox gores a consecrated ox, this is the reason its owner is liable, because Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh infers in a Kal V'chomer, in a fortiori, from the case of a non-sacred ox as follows. If in the case of a non-sacred ox that gores another non-sacred ox, the owner of the belligerent ox is liable, is it not clear that all the more so that when it gores a consecrated ox, the owner of the ox is liable? Dayo lavo min hadin lios kanidon. If this is Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh's reasoning, then his ruling that the owner of the ox pays the temple treasury the full cost of the damage, whether his ox was an ox or forewarned, is problematic, as it is sufficient for the conclusion that emerges from an a fortiori inference to be like its source. In other words, the halacha derived can't be more than what's being derived from. Therefore, just as there, in the case where an individual's innocuous ox gores another sacred ox, the owner pays half, here too, the innocuous ox of the non-sacred ox gores a consecrated ox, the owner should be allowed to pay only half the damage. Rather, Reish Lakish said that Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh's reasoning is as follows. In principle, all cases of damage were included among those in which the owner pays the full cost of the damage. The halacha is that in a case of an innocuous ox, the owner pays only half the cost of the damage is an exception to the rule, and when the verse specified the term of another with regard to an innocuous ox, it intended that it is specifically when one's innocuous ox gores the ox of another that the owner pays only half the cost of the damage, and by inference, if it gores a consecrated ox, whether the belligerent ox is innocuous or forewarned, its owner pays the full cost of the damage.